Hey everyone, welcome to Singularity Computers Client Build 14. This is going to be another extremely high-end water-cooled build. As you can see, I have some incredible components here, including the Caselabs STH10, the Asus Rampage 4 Black Edition, and 3 NVIDIA GTX Titans. This build is going to involve a small amount of modding, including custom paint and custom cables. The color scheme is going to be black and green. So I'm now going to get started with a brief overview of the components. So the case, as I've mentioned, is the Caselabs STH10. I have the Asus Rampage 4 Black Edition, the Intel Core i7-4930K, 32GB of Corsair Dominator GT, 2 Samsung 840 Pro Series 512GB SSDs, 3 EVGA GTX Titans. Now one of these is new, the other two are from the client's previous build. And these are actually the only two components in this build which are from the client's previous build. I also have an EVGA 3-way SLI bridge. Now moving on to the water cooling components. For the radiators in this build, I'm using two Black Ice SR1 560mm radiators. I have all EK nickel plexi CSQ clean water blocks for the CPU, motherboard, memory and graphics cards. You can see I have the CSQ clean tops here for the memory water blocks. I also have CSQ clean backplates for the graphics cards. I have Noise Blocker Black Solent Pro PK2s for the radiator fans, and I'm also using some Black Solent Pro PLPS for the case fans. I have two Swiftech MCP655s and two of the following: D5 black mod kits, D5 acrylic mod tops, and D5 acrylic upgrade kit 250s. So that's most of the components that are going into the system. I'm still waiting for some of the components to arrive, including the power supply. So we'll take a look at those components as they arrive, and I'll give you a closer look at some of the components as I'm building the system. Now for a brief look at the Caselabs STH10. I really wish I had more time to do a full review of this case. This is actually the first time I'm building into this case, so I'm really excited about this build. Now Caselabs has brought some incredible cases to the market and some always much needed competition. And Caselabs is well known for their massive cases, and initially Caselabs cases really gave rise to a whole new class of build, the monster, extremely high-end water-cooled system. I mean, we've seen so many monster Caselabs builds. We did have mountain mods before that, but they were nowhere near as popular. But recently Caselabs has been releasing a lot of new cases and also some small form factor cases. And in my opinion, their small form factor cases are just unmatched. I mean, it's everything that Caselabs is renowned for: quality, customization, amazing designs in a small form factor case. And I actually have a number of Caselabs small form factor builds coming up. If you consider that most cases are just a simple thin steel box with a bit of plastic around the outside, Caselabs has really taken things to the next level and brought something new. And you can understand the pricing of their cases when you look at the quality of the materials. I mean, there's no plastic, everything is aluminium. It's always thicker aluminium. Everything is bolted and screwed together. The designs are just excellent. They allow for so many different configurations and ideas, and the customization is really just endless. When you purchase a Caselabs case, you have so many different options available, and there's so many different accessories you can purchase for these cases. That's why a lot of people who are not really familiar with Caselabs cases can't recognize them, because there's so much customization that you can go for, that the cases just look different every time. I mean, if you look at the radiator configurations alone that are possible in this case, you can fit up to 4 560mm radiators by default in the top and bottom compartment, and another 360mm radiator on the front panel. Then you can go for a pedestal. I mean, you can have the motherboard tray facing either way, you can have it inverted, and that's just the very beginning when it comes to customization. Now for a look at the Asus Rampage 4 Black Edition. This motherboard has a number of new features and upgrades compared to the Asus Rampage 4 Extreme. The Rampage 4 Extreme was really getting a little bit outdated when it comes to Asus ROG features. This motherboard has a lot of the features that we see on the ROG Z87 motherboards, for example, the Maximus 6 Extreme. New power delivery components, higher frequency memory, upgraded sound. I mean, the sound on this motherboard is just incredible. It's getting close to a high-end sound card. And a whole lot of new overclocking features and other features. And I'm also really impressed with the aesthetics. I always like an all-black motherboard. And, you know, the cover over the back I/O just looks great. The design of the heat sinks. So starting in the top left-hand corner, we have a 4-pin ATX, 8-pin EPS, 4-pin PWM fan header. In the top right-hand corner of the motherboard, we have another 2 fan headers, LED poster, a temperature sensor header, slow mode switch and LN2 mode jumper, start and reset buttons, PCI Express dip switches, which I think every high-end motherboard should have. It's a very useful feature. The Memo K button, and moving down, the 24-pin connector, another fan header, another temperature sensor header. We then have a front panel USB 3 header and another fan header. On the right hand side of the motherboard here, we have some voltage read points and literally my favorite diagnostic feature of all time. You can see some small LEDs. These LEDs represent the different components and voltages on the motherboard and light up during post. If there's a problem during boot, you can tell exactly which component or voltage is causing the problem from these LEDs. So you might have a black screen and no idea what's going on. These LEDs can really save you a massive amount of time. This motherboard has 4 SATA 2 ports and 2 SATA 3 ports which run from the X79 chipset, and another 4 SATA 3 ports which run from an ASMedia controller. It has 2 BIOS chips, which is another extremely useful feature. Moving across the bottom of the motherboard, we have the front panel connectors, a number of overclocking features, another 2 fan headers, another temperature sensor header, 3 USB 2 front panel headers, an easy plug which gives extra power to the PCI Express slots. This one is a Molex connector, and a front panel audio header. Moving up the left hand side of the motherboard, you can see the incredibly high quality audio components. The audio on these motherboards just seems to be constantly improving. Moving up, you can see another fan header for a total of 8 4-pin PWM fan headers on this motherboard. This board has 4 PCI Express 3x16 slots which run at x16x16x8x8 and 2 PCI Express x1 slots. It can handle up to 64 gigabytes of 2800 MHz memory. It has an 8-phase power design for the CPU, 2+2 phase for the memory, and 3-phase for the VCCSA. On the back I/O, we have a combo PS2 port, 4 USB 2 ports for a total of 10 USB 2 on this motherboard, a CMOS reset button, ROG Connect button, 6 USB 3 ports for a total of 8 on this motherboard, 2 eSATA 3 ports which run from an ASMedia controller, gigabit LAN, Wi-Fi, and 8-channel audio. Another feature that comes with the Asus Rampage 4 Black Edition is the OC panel, and this could be a useful little feature. It's certainly not a gimmick. Bare minimum you can use it as a fan controller, but really it's designed for overclocking. Once you remove the front cover panel, you can see just how much functionality it has on the PCB. So you can see it has 4 4-pin PWM fan headers, it has sub-0 sense VGA hot wire, it has voltage read points here, and a whole bunch of other features. So it's powered via a SATA power connector at the bottom of the PCB, and there's also another cable you need to run to your motherboard. You can use it on your desk on this stand. If you go to do that, you currently use it as a fan controller, but you can use all of the overclocking features. Or you can install it into this cover and install it into a 5.25 inch bay, where it really would make a great fan controller. Now, some people like to use things like this for overclocking. I prefer to use the BIOS, but something like this can save a bit of time when you're making small adjustments and, pushing components as far as you can. It's certainly a nice little addition. I've now installed the motherboard into the case, and I've done this temporarily. You'll see why shortly. I've also installed the Intel Core i7 4930K into the motherboard. The power supplies have now arrived, and as you can see, I'm using two power supplies in this build. Seasonic power supplies, the XP860 Platinum and the XP1000 Platinum. And the reason I'm using two power supplies is because I'm assuming this build is going to draw a maximum of close to maybe 1100, 1200 watts once I overclock the CPU and graphics cards to the maximum. And so a 1200 watt power supply would have been borderline. So a 1500 watt power supply would have been okay, but the thing is I need to choose my power supplies carefully when I'm doing custom wiring. A lot of power supplies you just cannot do custom wiring with at all. It's impossible, or it's going to look terrible because of all of the different things that power supply manufacturers do, which really make custom wiring difficult, like putting multiple wires per pin, just having pinouts that are all over the place, crisscrossing wires, installing resistors. They do all kinds of things which make custom wiring very messy or impossible. So Seasonic power supplies are generally pretty good for custom wiring. There is a little bit of soldering we need to do with these power supplies, but it looks very clean once it's complete. There's plenty of room in this case for dual power supplies. So really I think dual power supplies are the way to go for this build. It's certainly going to allow for plenty of headroom, and it's just going to work out nicely with the configuration that I'm going for. So I've now installed the power supplies, again temporarily, as well as the graphics cards. And the reason I've installed these components is because I need to get the custom wiring measurements for a start, and there's also something else I'm going to move on to shortly. But to get the lengths for the custom wiring, I need to have a bare minimum of the motherboard, graphics cards, and power supplies installed. So you can see that I can now easily measure out the lengths of the custom wiring, and I've shown you how I do this previously. Just with a piece of wire, I lay it out into the position that I'm going to route the wiring. Now moving on to the assembly of the pump and reservoir configurations. Now I've been using most of these components for many years, since they were first released. And for a long time, this was really the only way to go for the D5, because not only do you have the option of a pump top, but also of a cover for the D5, which massively improves the aesthetics, because the stock D5 is an ugly pump, and this config covers the D5 completely. With the more recent addition of the Bits Power upgrade kit for the D5, it's just improved this config even more, because it allows you to mount a reservoir directly to the D5 pump top. Bits Power also has a DDC upgrade kit which allows you to do the same thing to the DDC pump top. So whether I'm using the D5 or the DDC, this has always been my favorite config. There is a number of different competing options now. EK has very similar configuration for the D5, including now also a cover for the pump, which they've released recently. They've also released a cover for the DDC, which is something we haven't seen yet. And there's also a similar option from XSPC. So a lot of great options out there for both D5 and DDC pump and reservoir configurations. I get a lot of questions about this config and also about the similar EK config. It is something I've covered a number of times previously. I've been through the assemblies, but I'm now going to briefly cover the different components you need to purchase which make up this pump and res config. So first of all, the pumps. What I have here is the Swiftech MCP655. Now this is just a D5 rebrand. And there's a lot of D5 rebrands. You can get D5s from EK, XSPC, AlphaCool, and a number of other companies. It doesn't really matter which one you go for, but there is something you need to watch out for. And that is, there's 3 different versions of the D5 now. This one has an RPM readout, which is the 3-pin fan header you can see. You can connect this to your motherboard and read off the RPM of the pump. There's also a manually speed controlled version which has a small dial on the back of the pump which allows you to manually adjust the RPM of the pump. And there's now a PWM version of the D5 which is definitely the one I recommend you go for. It is a bit more expensive, but being able to automatically control the RPM of the pump is certainly the way to go. So then there's the pump top, and the one I have here is the Bitspower Acrylic D5 Mod Top. You can also get this in acetal, in black, and also now in white. And there's also a dual version of this pump top, which also works with this particular configuration. Then there's the mod kit, and the one I have here is, as you can see, the matte black version. You can also get this in silver, gold, blue, and red, and black sparkle. And finally, there's the Bitspower upgrade kit, which comes in a whole lot of different versions. So first of all, it comes in different sizes, which is just referring to the size of Reservoir, which comes included with the upgrade kit. So you can get it in 150, 250, which is the one I have here, and also 400. You can also get it in acrylic and acetal, which is just referring to the base, which is actually the upgrade kit itself, and also the Reservoir top, which comes included. And you can get different Reservoir colors. You can get a red tint, a blue tint, a smoked version, and obviously a clear version. And then there's a whole lot of different Reservoir sizes which you can purchase separately, which you can install onto the Bitspower upgrade kit. You have a number of different inlet-outlet options with this pump and res config, and you can actually run your tubing back to an inlet on the pump top or back to the top of the res. If you're going to run it back to the top of the res, there's a couple of components you need to purchase separately. You need to purchase a multiple opening top for the Reservoir and a Bitspower Aqua Tube. I've now temporarily installed the pump and res configs into the case, so I'm currently doing a test fit. So there was two reasons I temporarily installed the motherboard and a number of other components. One, as I mentioned, was to get the lengths for the custom wiring. The other was to get the positioning for the pump and res configs. Now I've had to drill 6 holes per pump and res config to install them into this position, and I'm going to have to drill another hole per pump and res config underneath them to route the wiring. So minimal modding to install them into this position. And with the size motherboard tray I've chosen for this build, which is XL80X, and also the size side panel window, which is XXL, the largest side panel window you can go for this case, it's just worked out perfectly. You can see there's a good gap between the pump and res configs and the motherboard, still plenty of space towards the front of the case, and you can see with the side panel installed, all of the components are going to be perfectly visible and the aesthetics are going to be balanced. So this is a great configuration to go for in the STH10 and a very easy mod. I'm now going to install all of the water blocks, so I'm preparing the components ready to be installed into the system. All of the water blocks I'm using in this build are EK Nickel Plexi CSQ Clean, and the backplates I'm using on the graphics cards are also CSQ Clean. It's not often I'm able to match up all of the water blocks in a build, because usually the same type of water block is just not available for all of the different components that I'm using. So I'm excited to see how this is going to look, because CSQ Clean is certainly my favorite type of water block currently. I think EK is releasing some great looking blocks now. So you can see that 2 of the Titans are secondhand from the client's previous build. The stock coolers have already been removed and they just need a quick cleanup before I install the water blocks. And one of the Titans is new. So just a brief look at the memory. It's been a while since I've installed a Corsair Dominator GT kit of memory. So this is a 32GB kit. It runs at 1866 MHz, 910, 927, 1.5 volts. So I've now completed the installation of all of the water blocks for this build. And this would have to be one of the best looking configs I've seen, because I absolutely love the look of this motherboard. And the entire top half of the motherboard is almost completely covered by EK Nickel Plexi CSQ Clean water blocks, which, as I've mentioned, I also love the look of these blocks. And this is 5 blocks in extremely close vicinity. So you can imagine the complex Bitspower Crystal Link configuration that is going to be above these water blocks. I was able to keep the back I/O panel cover in position by doing a small mod. All I did was cut the small copper tube that runs between the back I/O panel cover and the MOSFET heatsink at the top of the motherboard. But this is just an incredible looking config, something that I would certainly want in my own build. And these graphics card water blocks, I actually have these in my own build currently, and they're certainly one of my favorite graphics card blocks of all time. What I like most about them is that the acrylic covers the entire PCB, and that's what I think all blocks should look like. And I really like that, you can actually see the PCB still, and there's no frosting, no circles. So I also like the look of the blank backplates. I think they look great, so it's an excellent combination. At this point in the build, I'm about halfway through doing the custom paint. As you can see, this is only a few of the panels from the case. So as I've mentioned, the color scheme is black and green. And both of the colors I'm using are metallics. The green is called Verd Flag. It's really a mint green, a little bit of a darker green. The black is actually a charcoal, and both of the colors have a nice strong metallic, which you can't really see here because the light is not that great. And I also haven't yet polished these panels. I still need to spend a lot of time polishing them to get a good gloss finish. Now, the black is only going to be an accent in the build and also in the case panels. The black is probably going to make up about 1/4 of the case panels, but I'm only using black on the cover panels and also the motherboard tray. And most of those panels are actually going to be covered. So the black is going to be an accent, which means the components are really going to stand out. Most of the components are black. But that sums up this part of the build log. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and favorite if you want to see more.